So once the culture's built and we're kind of getting there, how do business leaders sustain that culture virtually?
This is so important because a lot of people probably don't have those foundational basics that we talked about at
Mhm.
the beginning there. And so that culture is kind of in and out. When we're having a team night out, it feels great. And then we get to the office and it's completely fallen flat again. But even if you take all of these recommendations and you're actively building your culture, it can also fall flat from there. Okay, we constantly have to feed it and nurture it and make sure that it's surviving through this, which is why you constantly need to take an umbrella approach and step out and go, where are we? So the first thing that you need to do is listen to your team and adapt your tactics as needed. So, a great example, because sales is something that we're all focused on in this environment. If you put £100 into Facebook advertising and you got no return from it, would you just keep throwing 100 quid at Facebook again and again and again? No, you would not. You would ask yourself, what's going on here? Why isn't this giving me the return that I want to see from that? And it's the same with your culture. You have to look and measure your success and go, where are we? So you want to keep your finger on the pulse by measuring staff engagement. And if it's near death, you need to revive it. Well, how do you actually go about measuring staff engagement? There are a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this, and so many tools. And I'd say really it just depends on the size of your organization, because if you're a micro SME who's got maybe a couple of different employees, then having a survey probably doesn't feel authentic to you, because you can probably have a conversation with your team members individually to get that gauge from them. But if you're a huge organization, you're not necessarily going to have time for a one-to-one with every individual in the business. So you can look at things like Google Forms. There are so many different tools, Survey Monkey, that you can use to have that time. And I would always say to balance it with offer an in-person way of doing that, but also look at a survey, because then you can have an actual tactical measurement of our engagement increased by X% over this time. But with that in mind, you need to make sure that you are getting an honest measurement when you are doing this. So my great example is that, unfortunately, as much as you value your team and as much as you feel like you're giving your all to gain people's respect and to make sure that you have this open door policy, the reality is there are going to be people in the business that do have a level of fear or feel like they can't openly articulate their honest opinions. I'd say if you're that CEO that's very involved in the business, and unfortunately you have to be having the conversations with people to say, where are we with sales targets? Why isn't this done? And it feels like every time you're having a conversation with your team, it's not necessarily in the best light. You might not be the best person for people to talk to and openly articulate that. So just be honest with yourself. It doesn't mean you're a bad leader. It doesn't mean you have a bad culture. It's just doing the right thing to make sure there is a channel for people to go to be able to have that conversation. And so it may be a HR person, it may be the marketing director, it might be the operations director, it can be anybody. But just think, if I send out a survey or offer one-to-ones, are people going to have that conversation with me? If they don't, you need to find another channel for them to do that. But you also need to think about what you can do to help alleviate some of those issues of people being honest. And part of that is capturing that information and actively showing people, I've listened and I've reacted to it in your favor. And that will let.
That's the key thing, isn't it? I think if, it's all well and good getting people to complete a survey, but if there's never anything off the back of it, there's a problem, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is it. If it's near death and you're just letting it die, then unfortunately you're never going to get anywhere. And also, I think with some teams and some cultures, what happens when you just do a survey but you never react is that people go, well, they're capturing my response, but they're not doing anything about it. So what's the purpose of them doing that? Are they doing anything malicious with it? I mean, we have to really put ourselves into the heads of human beings. Unfortunately, as human beings, when we are not sure, we make those assumptions, as I talked about earlier, and it's never in the employer's favor. So you might be doing things behind the scenes, but you need to articulate if you are reacting to that, because again, it shows that you're learning and growing, and that's absolutely what you want as a business. I would say in that light, how do you sustain a culture virtually? Well, it's not just the leader that needs to do that, okay? It needs to be the entire business. And so what's really important for you and your time and your resources is to also make sure that you distribute accountability across your team. When I work with these big brand projects with organizations, obviously there's a lot of change that goes on internally. And so one of the things that we have to look at is, well, how do we get everybody else involved so it's not just driving on one person or one team to do all of the work? And so we often look at something called brand champions, which are people throughout all levels of the business. So it's not just our managers, it can be people that are entry level, way up to the top. And those people are responsible for taking the pulse of their department, for scheduling activities, for taking ideas and bringing them up to management and meeting with other departments in the business to make sure that we're fostering and cultivating that culture across all levels. So also make sure you consider something like that. If you know that you're going to be strapped for time in December because it's year end and you're going to be really busy with all of the different things that need to happen, then see who else you can make sure to drive that. I think one of the businesses that I worked for had chief fun officers, which is a slight twist on CFO, not just finances. And I loved that because they were two
Mm.
people that were fun. They were people that naturally everybody kind of went to when it came to culture building activities. And by giving them that informal or formal title, it meant that they really took accountability for their role, and it made a huge difference internally. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do that.